Podmany.
The blackest eyes, the devil's eyes.
Hail to the king, baby.
Boy! The plan is, kill the brain, and you kill the ghoul.
Welcome to hell.
I said, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Welcome to prime time.
Hello everybody and welcome to the podcast in the Backseat. I am Matthew Hutton. Joined again with me today is...
Wayne Alexander. Still feeling sensual today, Mr. Hutton?
Always feeling sensual. It's a bad day when I'm not.
Sensual. It's such a good word. It's right up there with moist pube.
Pube. Oh gosh. When our t-shirts come out, they're going to look great. Oh.
I would love to see like a famous director, horror director in mind, walk around with a t-shirt that just says moist pube.
I want the director of The Cube to wear a shirt that says the moist pube within the cube.
Oh, it's going to bug me again as to what the name of that director is.
I know, I'm sure we mentioned it in an earlier episode.
Oh, we did in the last one, and it is really... It's not Patrick Lussier, it's not Nacho Vigalondo, it is definitely not such an IMDb whilst we're speaking.
Those directors that you mentioned there are all like, they said my name! Oh.
Or is it just called Cube?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's why, The Cube. Which is different, but mind, it's I know as soon as I say it, it's gonna just... Vincenzo Natali.
Well remembered.
So yeah, The Cube. So it's not The Cube, it's Pube.
Pube. God.
Piebs.
Piebs.
So
Hyperpube.
Pube Zero.
Shaved
Trying to
pube.
think of any other words there, right?
The Tube.
That famous movie with Christian Slater gleaming the pube.
Oh God. No.
Rubik. Which brings us to our next topic involving the Rubik's Cube. So we decided that we were going to review 2008's Let the Right One In. This is my choice because I wanted to kind of go a different direction, so we're not trying to keep it in the same vein based on the last two movies that we've done, which is so far we've done The Fog, and what was the other one?
It was My Bloody Valentine, the original. Mm-hmm. So they're both they kind of hit the 80s. Mm-hmm. I don't want to say cheese fest because that's a sort of derogatory term, but that sort of vein. Where
I like it.
Yeah.
I like a bit of cheese.
Yeah, I love 80s cheese, especially, to be honest. Mature.
There's nothing wrong with it. Yeah, mature. That's given different connotations to yeah, mature.
It's like a fine cheddar.
Fine cheddar. Cracker Barrel. Cathedral City. Other cheeses are available. But yeah, so we decided we're gonna. Well, I thought I would take a left turn with it and do something different. So I decided that we would rewatch Let the Right One In. A few facts behind the movie. Originally made in 2008, based on a book which came out in 2004, which was written by John Alva Linkvist, directed by Thomas Alfredson, who would then go on to make such movies as the recent remake of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. This particular movie was remade in 2010, set in 1982 Sweden. But yeah, it's something I thought we'd go a different direction with.
Yeah.
Matt, you'd already seen it beforehand?
Yeah, well, it's one of those films that I'd heard of since it come out, obviously in 2008, and I never really thought much about it. Even when the remake was coming out, it was just something that was always in the background. And again, I've mentioned this poster before, but my partner got me a poster of 100 movies to watch, and they're all horror. And this was on it, so I've only ever seen this movie once before. And that was actually last year, so it's quite nice to revisit it, knowing what's coming out. I like to rewatch things because I notice things a lot more. But I don't know. Is this? Have you viewed it multiple times yourself, or?
I think about 4 or 5. Generally, I'll sort of suggest somebody else watches it. And so a little bit of backstory from me. I was in a relationship at the time, and she says, "Oh, let's go to the Tyneside Cinema, which is like a boutique cinema in Newcastle upon Tyne. It's run very much by viewers for viewers, old style building, phenomenal. I try and go there as often as I possibly can. Instead of going to the chain ones, not that there's anything wrong with them, but there's just something lovely. And you and I have both been to see a couple of movies there, which are loads of fun. No backstory, knew nothing about it. I think it's because this came out in 2008, it was prior to almost being sort of saturated with the amount of content and previews and trailers and everything else that you kind of get to know about it. So I knew very little about it, just as she decided, she was told by a friend at the time, you should go and see the movie. Watched it with no preconceptions, and I'm glad that I did.
Yeah.
I've then recommended it to subsequent friends and everything else, which is, and they've really enjoyed it as well. And it's not horror in the traditional sense as to what people might think. It's got a creepy movie poster, very sort of minimalistic. There's not really much going on, but you're drawn in.
Yeah. I see what you mean as well with you saying you've seen it about 4 times, which is probably a lot since 2008, if you know what I mean, because it's a sort of film that you might watch once a year if you are that into it, if that. It's not bad at all. It's just, I think with its style and things like that, in a way it's an uncomfortable movie.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I would agree that it's uncomfortable. What before we kind of get into it too much, what I wanted to kind of do was sort of give a brief synopsis as to what the movie was, sort of the official kind of synopsis to what the movie is, because I believe in previous ones we've kind of dived into it and sort of not sort of, I don't want to say anything that's going to kind of ruin it. So officially, Oscar, an overlooked and bullied boy, finds love and revenge through Ellie, a beautiful but peculiar girl. What would your sort of brief, very short, as least amount of words as you possibly can, what would your synopsis of the movie be without spoiling anything?
Yeah, well, the easiest way, again, your protagonist Oscar living in I don't want to say he's underprivileged, but kinda underprivileged boy in Sweden, so it's quite hard to date where it is throughout the year. Is it winter? I'm guessing so. There's an awful lot of snow. There's a lot of mystery going on in the background, and he is being bullied, which is a key feature. So he's underprivileged, going to school, not respected at all by his peers. All of a sudden meets somebody that changes his perspective, and he grows as a person. Or does he?
That's a very beautiful and poignant description. So I doth my cap to you, sir. But yeah, it's sort of, for me, my shortened version of it: boy meets girl, shit goes sideways in Sweden.
In Sweden.
The land of flat pack furniture. I assume schnapps. Please correct me if I'm wrong. If you do have any corrections for us, it's at a beautiful Instagram page that we have, which is @podcast in the backseat.
That again is
@podcast in the backseat on Instagram. So if you have any questions, any suggestions, please feel free. Drop us a message and we'll gladly take it on board. Please don't give us any abuse. I've got some delicate sensibilities.
I love abuse. I'm a kinky bitch.
Don't feed the trolls unless they're real trolls, and we need to keep them alive to be studied.
Don't feed them after midnight. Put them in a blender. Anyway. That sort of brings to mind, that's maybe a movie we could sort of review at a later date, which would be, do you say troll or troll? I say troll, but that's probably just my Geordie tongue coming out. The north of England, they're all like book instead of cook, as a lot of people say.
A cookbook.
A cookbook, which my partner laughs at me for with it being Scottish. But the one thing that seems to really upset people is I'm a big fan of Doctor Who, early Doctor Who especially, and my favourite character is, and I will I describe this word this way, as the Master, where everybody else in the world says Master apparently, and that just seems to bug the crap out of people. I think it's because I'm a wannabe snob more than anything.
I think that's sort of one of those ones that people say that they're studying to do their masters. I think maybe if you're studying to do a master's, that you might start pronouncing it as masters.
Yeah. Or if you're the nemesis to a time traveling alien.
Masters, but yeah, it's fine. I'm fine with both, as long as you don't say issues instead of issues.
Oh no, that makes I cringe through my butthole.
I think that that annoys me right up along the words of it's two words that really make me sort of issues, and the word pussy makes my skin crawl. I don't know what it is. Issues and that word I just mentioned beforehand that I'm trying to refrain from saying beforehand. It's just wrong.
To cat.
So we've got the synopsis kind of covered. What were your sort of initial thoughts on the movie before we kind of go down the senses?
To be honest, the way I was when I first went into it, it was one of the films on the poster that I mentioned a few times that I wasn't looking forward to because of how it looks. I thought this looks kind of dull compared to the likes of Halloween, which is my favourite film, The Thing. There's a lot of Carpenter films on that poster, you see. So there's a lot of 80s cheese, and then all of a sudden this Swedish cheese, we're doing it again, the Swedish film about what looked to be a very depressing scenario, because I knew nothing about it, and when I went in, I watched, you will watch things and you'll do other things in the background maybe, with it being subtitled that might help keep my focus, but I was completely focused throughout the whole thing and absorbed it entirely, and after it's the sort of film that you will not watch anything after for about 20 minutes because you're sat there not figuring it out but just kind of understanding what it is you've just watched. I did the same thing with the likes of Midsummer for a different reason entirely. But I grew to kind of really love it. It's not a film that I'd annually watch, but I don't think it was made for that. I think it was made to tell a story, and it's a lasting story. It's a bit like, and I know someone who does, but it's a bit like Silence of the Lambs. You don't need to watch that more than once, maybe. It's an incredible movie. It's possibly one of the best movies ever made. But once you've seen it, it sticks. It definitely sticks.
Yeah, I think the term, I don't know if it's affecting or affecting, and sort of I think sort of you're right in the fact that it is, and I hate to use the term foreign film. Yeah, it's a movie with subtitles. It's a non-English speaking movie, so I think you have to pay attention more. Like there's plenty of movies I've watched, slashers, loads of horror movies, loads of other bits and pieces whereby I can kind of divert my focus. I can check my phone, I can sit and do something else, or I can nip off and make myself like a cup of coffee and come back and I'll still know what's going on because it's more apparent. But with this you have to pay attention, primarily because I don't speak Swedish. It turns out I don't, so I have to pay attention and sort of read the subtitles, and I can't think of anything worse than watching a horror film, or any film for that matter, dubbed, because that completely detracts and removes any intonation, any tone, any emotion that goes behind any sort of dialogue that happens within the course of the movie. Which brings me.
I mentioned earlier I'm a huge Godzilla fan, and as a kid I grew up watching them on Channel 4 as well. So some of the 60s, 70s onwards, and they were dubbed. And I've gone back to that because I've gone through them multiple times because I am a huge geek, and watching them dubbed, it's the worst thing, especially the way they were dubbed back then as well, where they were using what can only be described as English. It's painful. It's horrible. Watching them subtitled, it was like watching a new film again. It was like all of a sudden I'm falling in love with this brand new. Like I could not watch Let the Right One In dubbed, 100%, and that's why I've avoided the remake a little bit, because I don't know. It's probably not bad, and I've heard good things since, to be honest with you. And I'll definitely watch it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a bit like watching something dubbed as well. I don't. If the source material is good enough, why remake it? They remade all of the old Godzillas, and that annoyed the crap out of me. So.
I think provided it has something to add or a different route in which it can go down, like stuff that we've mentioned, it sort of beforehand is like different subject matter handled differently. I.e., say, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was inspired by Ed Gein, as was Psycho and a bunch of other movies that we've probably mentioned at some point or another.
Buffalo Bill.
The source material is the same. However, somebody's interpretation of it. It can vary, and I think my understanding for the remake is it sticks more to the book rather than trying to retread or do shot-for-shot remake of the original. Unlike, and again, I'm trying not to be negative in any way, shape, or form. There is a remake of Psycho, and I believe, from my understanding, it is a shot-for-shot remake of the original.
Yeah.
And for all the money in the world, I would not want to do that.
No, I don't want to have the balls big enough to say, Alfred Hitchcock, I could do better.
Alfred, you didn't. I'm going to do this bad boy in colour.
I know. I'll be honest again, not to be negative. I have seen the first 20 minutes of the remake of Psycho, and it is exactly shot for shot. All it does is it really enforces how good the original is. So I turned it off and watched the original.
So there's a positive to be taken from, the remake makes you want to go back and watch the original.
Exactly.
Because the original is fantastic.
It's like a huge trailer for the original. God.
But yeah, so sort of we've covered the kind of initial thoughts as to what we kind of thought about. Like, I really, really enjoyed it because it's so different, but there's so many elements of familiarity to what I know and what I kind of grew up with as a child of the 80s.
Do you know what
the colour, the aesthetic, the feel, and everything else was very similar, and it's very similar across the expanse of Europe as well.
Yeah.
Housing estates and things like that, architecture. There's a lot of things that sort of are strangely familiar, so therefore it does have some sort of universal appeal for other people across, not just Europe but the rest of the world. I'm sure.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, what I really liked about it, as well as what you're saying there's a lot of familiarity, and there absolutely is, with the differences as well. What I really liked about it was, and there's another film, I believe it's Korean, called Thirst, and I think you see where I'm going with it to a degree. It's a different way to tell the same story almost. So obviously, no spoilers, you probably all know at this point, the female character Ellie, or Eli, is a vampire.
Yeah.
And the way that's handled is so different. Like, it's so polar opposite to what you're used to that it really is quite striking. Like, when you were saying you watch a film, normally you'll get up and make coffee. I think I got up to make a coffee and I had to pause it because I didn't want to miss a second of it.
Yeah, the movie in which you're talking about is Chan-wook Park, who directed the Revenge trilogy, as well as a bunch of other fantastic movies. But yes, Thirst is very much a different spin on the vampire trope, or the vampire kind of genre. And I think sort of, and we'll get into it a little bit more, and this is something my partner mentioned as well, is that it doesn't glamorize it in any way, shape or form. And a little sort of factoid, it only uses the word vampire once throughout the course of the movie.
Really?
Yeah. And I think that's very much intentional. I think my understanding is that the director hates, the director and the writer of the book as well, two separate people by the way, don't like vampire movies. And I can kind of get that, because it's been to a certain extent has been done, for want of a better word, to death.
To undeath.
Or the undeath. To a death. So somebody decided that I'm going to do something different with it. And I really, really enjoyed that about it. And the whole idea that it's not trying to make it sleek, it's not trying to make it sexy. You're not sitting watching a windswept Tom Cruise or a Brad Pitt looking stoic and sort of sultry and sexy and everything else. It doesn't try and do that with it. Because if you imagine if you've sort of been infected in some way, shape or form and become somebody who's dead or undead, or which way you want to classify it. In order to survive, you have to feast or drink human blood. That's going to be a bit of an inconvenience. All right, I can only be awake. Yeah. Well, if you think about it, what I'm going to do today, I can't do anything during the day because I'll potentially burst into flames.
Yeah.
There we go. Straight away, I can't go for a lovely stroll during the day. Little mints through the park. I can't do that anymore. I can't go around whenever all the daffodils are blooming. I can't do that because I'll die. All right, what are you gonna have? Oh, I really fancy some ramen noodles, bit of mac and cheese. No, just nothing but some form of blood in order to sustain me. So it doesn't glamorize it in any way, shape, or form, which I think is really, really clever. Because it'd be a pain in the hole being a vampire.
Oh yeah, it would be pain in both holes in your neck.
Exactly. Plus other people, you're gonna go, because eventually you're gonna run low on people that you don't like.
Yeah.
And eventually you're gonna have to start feasting on somebody that you do.
Yeah.
And you're just gonna have to progressively start. I'd imagine there's a lot of paperwork involved, pros and cons.
But I'm hungry. No, a little factoid as well that I know of, because I was originally going to do a podcast on Sherlock Holmes. So I looked into it, and apparently, when you're saying that the director it doesn't like vampire movies an awful lot because there's just so many of them, the character that has the most movies made about them is in fact Dracula. So you can see his point to a degree. At this point, I think there's over 500 films made about Dracula. That's insane. How many times can you tell that? And it's not the same story a lot of the time. One film as well, which we didn't mention on last episode because we were talking about parodies, and I'm surprised because I really love Leslie Nielsen and Mel Brooks.
I know exactly what you're going to say before.
It's Dracula Dead and Loving It. Absolutely great movie.
It's the scene where somebody's driving the stake through the vampire's heart, and apparently that scene, they didn't let them know as to how much blood was going to come out. So the surprise and the bit where he has to kind of wipe it away from his face and out of his eyes is an entirely genuine reaction. It's just such a huge amount of blood, and I love the fact that I forgot that that's a Mel Brooks movie, because he did Young Frankenstein, which is a love letter to that era of filmmaking, whilst also remaining tongue-in-cheek and everything else, but staying quite relatively true to the source material, but also poking fun and taking the piss a little bit. But yeah, Dracula Dead and Loving It, I forgot about that. I'm going to have to rewatch that. It's a lot of fun.
It's class. She's almost dead. Oh, it's really good.
Thoughts. So what sense do you want to start with?
Yeah, well,
Mr. Hutton.
I think with this one as well, specifically, the most striking sense was probably sight. So I'll start with sight, because there's an awful lot, as we've mentioned before, the setting for me, it looks like it's another underprivileged family, maybe, but it could just even be the location itself, as you've mentioned, with it being Sweden. That could just be a lot of it, but it's very dark, which is fairly obvious for a vampire movie as well, yet bright at the same time, which I find really interesting, because with there being heavy snow all of the time, you can see everything. So though if you actually look at the night sky, it looks as though there's not a star in the whole friggin' universe, because it's just a blanket darkness. And then you look at the contrast on the ground of the snow and the action in between. The framing of it is beautiful. It's sandwiched together. And again, vibrant reds, a lot of vibrant reds, with blood being very important in a vampire movie. And not to keep going on about him, but I could talk about him until I die. John Carpenter is the master of background action. In a lot of, I want to say, art house films rather than non-English speaking films, because English films do this as well. There's the way the action or the violence takes place isn't quite in your face, but is in your face in the way it's executed. Like the bit where the bully's talking to the main character, which I've already forgotten his name, and Oscar, and he wants to throw him in the ice, and he warns him, "I'm going to thwack you with this stick if you come closer." So he does, But the way that shot is, it jumps back to a very wide angle, and all you see is him just thwapping on the ear, which is hilarious, by the way. And you hear this little.
And you know what?
Flip.
I've hurt myself, or I've slipped on the ice, or I've smashed my hand or something in the cold, and you just know full well that's going to hurt 10 times more due to the fact that it's cold. Like if somebody used to clip you around the ear whilst your ears are red and sore from the loss of temperature and everything else. But yeah, I watched it and I just went, oh, fuck. Oh.
It's true.
I felt it. I'm just going, oh, even though I'm going, yes, get in, you I hate this kid.
Yeah.
You know, I don't wish violence on children most of the time, but in this particular sense, I'm just going, yeah, smash him, hit him in the face with a big stick that was previously used to dispose of a body.
Yeah.
Yes.
He's got 2 years. Go again.
I know he does.
And then at the very end, again, no spoilers or anything, but at one point, the main character is being held in a swimming pool, and the way that's shot, again, it's beautiful. The camera is focused on the main character. He's underwater. You see this kid's hand, and then in the background, somebody's just being pulled, and it's just dragged, and then all of a sudden, you hear another thwip, and the hand comes down, severed. It's bravo.
It takes me back to what Alfred Hitchcock was quite famous for doing whenever it came to horror movies, and I think he was maybe one of the first ones to do it, correct me if I'm wrong. Is it the protagonist or the person in the shot at that time is not aware of what's happening and what's creeping up on them to a certain extent? Say the scene in The Birds where she's sitting chilling out, I think she's smoking outside the school, because yeah, that's what you do, not creepy at all. And there's just more and more birds just landing on this jungle gym, this climbing frame. I'm just going, come on, you're gonna have to notice. Can you not hear that? You know, little claws landing on metal. Run.
Yeah.
Do one. Does she not know the name of the movie? I don't think she does.
She can't run though. She's sat there smoking. Her lungs black like tar. Second-hand smoke to these kids, fucking bastards.
And probably back then there would have been no filter. It would have been high tar, high nicotine, high chemicals, high everything.
It contained traces of bird.
I know.
That's why they were angry.
Exactly. That's what it was. Factory floor sweepings and bits of bird, and that's why they suddenly take a dislike into her and the residence in which she's decided to shack up in with some strangers, as far as I'm aware. But yeah, that's a bit sort of very clever that the character in the shot at the time is not aware as to what's going on around them.
Yeah.
And that particular scene is really, really clever. And it's because your main focus is the child who's there in the water, and then it's just little bits and pieces that take place in the background, which are very, very well done. Yeah. And I really, really enjoyed that. And it made me laugh to a certain extent because you're rooting for the protagonist. Yeah. You're rooting for little Oscar.
Yeah. Who up until that point was getting a load of shit off this kid as well, and you kind of wanted it to happen. But again, that scene, it's so beautiful because the tension's ramping up, and there's those kids that need to go away for a pee or something, and you see the thwip. The kids come back and report a dead body. It's like, oh, okay then. Because
it's like there's one scream, and then there's another one. Sort of, it almost comes in stereo. So you got the scream from the kid who's been hit around the face, quite rightly so, might add, and then we've found somebody in Holy. We've found somebody in the melted ice. But yeah, really, really sort of well done as far as that's concerned. And the framing of it as well, I think there's that lovely stark contrast between this beautiful white and then the darkness of the sky, which I'm sure is probably an artistic direction, i.e. that's an element of what's happening within the story as well. The contrast between dark and light. But yeah, and I think the opening is particularly very, very beautiful. It's just that dusting of very, very light snow against the stark blackness. Yeah. And the movie ends in the same way as well. Yeah. So it's sort of like bookended with this beautiful shot and this beautiful shot, and it's the story, it's the journey that's taking place between the two of them, which is really, really nice.
Really bookends it. Yeah. It's really nice.
Mm-hmm. So what other aspects of like sort of sight things that you saw throughout the course of the movie? You mentioned the colour red, which I agree is used to great effect. The sled, the stick that the kid's using, victims in particular as well are wearing red. But like little contrasts, little slivers of red throughout the course of the movie, really jump out at you, and you're almost looking for it to a certain extent if you're consciously viewing it rather than sort of having it play in the background because you've got something to watch.
Yeah, I think there's a lot, because you mentioned earlier about the minimalist style. That really lends well when there is something striking. So there's a bit where Oscar accidentally sees Ellie as she's getting dressed, which just comes out of nowhere, and it's quite a shock. And actually, there was a little tidbit on that. Apparently, Eli in the book, the book originally, was actually a castrated boy. And that was just like a little hint, because obviously the kid in this, or the character in this, because apparently she's 300-year-old according to some fan theories, because you're never explicitly told. But as she turned, or as he turned, he was also castrated at the time. So there's a couple of little hints throughout. But that scene in particular as well, it's really striking because of there's a lot of scenes where they're just sat there talking, and you think, well, this is oddly driving the story forward in a very weird way, where normally that would halt it. And then all of a sudden there's just these striking images where you think, oh, well, that's taken me out of the comfort zone completely. So it draws you back in. Yeah,
I think there's a scene with the jar involved, which I think it's very clever. Not to give anything away. There's monstrous use of a jar throughout the course of the movie, and it's very clever in the same way that it does it. And you've mentioned it beforehand in previous conversations that we've had, which is Psycho, where I remember in my head seeing the actual horrific bit play out involving said jar, and then whenever I watch it again, you don't see it. It's my brain is filled in the blanks in the same way that you see a knife entering a woman's body in the shower scene in Psycho.
Yeah.
Like, you see her getting stabbed, or as you mentioned beforehand, you see a nipple. You don't. Your brain is filled in the blanks.
Yeah.
It's got from jump one part to another, and your brain's just went, oh, I remember seeing that. It's that's horrible, and you don't see it.
It's very Shakespearean, like Macbeth. Very famously didn't have the murder scene in the play, because your imagination as an audience member makes more horrific horror than any filmmaker, or obviously he was a playwright, could have actually conveyed. So I think it's nice to do that, but that jar,
I'm trying to think of any other stuff that I've said. So I've already mentioned about the snow, the stark contrast between the two of them. It looks horrifically cold.
Yeah, as you've mentioned, that also makes... That's an insanely good point with the snow. Pain seems to hurt a lot more when you're freezing cold. So, yeah. Plus the setting, there's an awful lot of woodland, I've noticed. Or woodland, sorry. Woodland.
Because I never knew this for years. Sweden is massive. Friends of mine went to a rock festival in Sweden, and they had to drive for like 7-8 hours through. Like, it is very sparsely populated, particularly in the countryside. There's a lot of trees and rivers and wood and everything else, and there's massive gaps between where people live, etc. Especially sort of particularly during sort of the winter months, whenever it's dark for quite a lot of the day. Which would be ideal if you think about it. That's actually quite clever for a certain portion of the year. If you were indeed a vampire or whatever, you would have free reign to run about and sort of run amok and sort of almost gorge yourself.
Yeah.
But then during other parts of the year where it would be brighter for longer, you're a little bit more hindered. So it kind of makes sense to kind of move there.
Very 30 days.
In Barrow, Alaska.
Yeah.
Based on a Steve Niles comic book, which is really, really good. We'll probably at some point or another probably talk about horror comics and horror video games and TV shows, etc. Penny Dreadful, to name, just to name one of them, which is phenomenal. Getting back to the site, it's a very muted palette movie.
Yeah,
it's like somebody's turned the color down, and that kind of reflects what's happening with the characters and within the story. Because the kid's kind of he's having a bit of a hard time. His mum and dad are split up. It's just sort of kind of really sort of muted. Even himself, he almost kind of looks very sort of almost anemic.
Yeah.
Sort of very pale and everything else. And I don't know whether that's just who he is at the time, or maybe that was an intentional thing to do, what depict this particularly kind of pale kid on a pale background with little aspects and little sort of dots of colour and everything else that go out through
it's
the course of the movie.
Monochrome colour film I've ever seen.
And realistically, you could almost, to a certain extent, do what Steven Spielberg did, or even like Robert Rodriguez with Sin City and with Schindler's List. You could do the film in black and white with just little flashes of colour, and it would still work really, really well. But I do like a lot of movies in black and white.
Yeah.
Because you're not distracted by the colour, you're more concentrating as to what's going on with the story and the dialogue and everything else.
Yeah, I watched it was a colorized version of Night of the Living Dead, and it's not worse because it's an amazing film, but I actually prefer it in black and white. For some reason, it's just, it works. That's why Mel Brooks, not why, but one of the reasons Mel Brooks did Young Frankenstein in black and white, because celluloid was also cheaper in black and white back then, but it also looked better.
Yeah, and it makes sense to kind of go along with that particular
like aesthetic,
that style, that aesthetic. That's the word I was looking for, was the aesthetic that goes along with it. As far as any other kind of bits and pieces that kind of that stuck out for me was yes, I was thinking about the white. I don't know whether this was our artistic intent, that the white's meant to kind of represent innocence to a certain extent. And I know in some poetry actually conveys death. Yeah. Which this kind of does both. And I don't know if that's something I'm putting something in my own, or that's something that was intentional. But yeah, I think apparently white's meant to represent innocence to a certain extent, and also death, like lilies. Yeah. Lilies that are sort of used for funerals, etc., are white. So
undead, almost.
Yes, undead, yeah. And then the other aspects of like sort of like colour, etc., that kind of stood out for me was the colour of Ellie, her eyes. And she's very pale and very muted, and it's almost black and white to a certain extent, possibly due to how long that she's lived, or the fact that she's potentially undead. And then you get that stark sort of hit of red whenever she's had to, not because she wants to, it's a need rather than a want in order to feed. And visually, I thought what was really good is she's quite remorseful. Yeah. She's quite sorry that she's had to feast on somebody, and that she's had to. There's a scene after she gets a guy wearing a red jacket. Yeah. And then she kind of buries her head in his chest and just be like, I've had to do this again because I need to, rather than because I want to.
And if the fans are right, that sort of guilt for 300 years, like, it's quite sad.
Yeah. And I think sort of, for all intents and purposes, this movie is it kind of walks a fine line between, for me personally, and tell me if I'm wrong, if it's like a coming of age story for little Oscar, and almost like an evolution for Ellie, who's been around supposedly for hundreds of years, and like it's a love story, but it's kind of very innocent, and it's very sort of pre-pubescent. Yeah. Sort of, sort of they want to be with each other, and they kind of want to hold each other to a certain extent, but they don't know what to do with themselves because they've not got to that age, because one has had their aging process kind of halted, and the other one's still very, very young. Yeah. Like 12 or so don't know what to do with these kind of emotions and how to kind of express them physically, apart from like hugging each other, etc. Yeah. And there's a very beautiful scene in it where Ellie says, well, what if I wasn't a girl? And it's like, oh, would you still want to be my boyfriend? Yeah. And that there's something I found that really touching and very beautiful. Yeah. That because he's a child and he hasn't got any preconceived notions about anything else as far as gender, etc. is concerned, he doesn't care. Yeah. And nor should he. He loves this girl, whatever somebody wishes to sort of convey it, etc. Argument could be made that it's neither a boy nor a girl. It's a vampire. It's a true. Yeah. Yeah. Like a different species to you and I. But I thought that was very poignant and very beautiful and very, very nice. Yeah. So anything else you want to add as far as like visually sight? What What drew you in?
Those are the main things, to be honest, that I picked up upon. They really do couple well, and this happens quite a lot where I'll end up combining a lot of the senses because they do, and a good film will blend them. So this really does couple well, and it's a nice segue into the sound. So you've got these long, drawn-out scenes with a very stationary camera to stick to sight almost there as well. Because I don't know if you've noticed the camera's quite static for quite a lot of the movie as well.
Yeah, I didn't see any tracking shots or anything else. I think it's the camera stays still and the action happens in and around what's happened at that particular point.
So the action comes to the camera rather than the camera goes to the action, which is quite nice. It gives it a more real feeling a little bit. It also uses, clearly a tripod, which sounds silly, but when you notice shaky cam, for me as a filmmaker, drives me mad. So I appreciated that greatly. And
I think if it adds something, then shaky cam or whatever can be used to great effect.
It's when it's a conversation scene, it drives me up the wall. It's like you're talking to someone, you're supposed, because the reason they're doing it is because the camera is a person in the conversation. When I'm looking at someone or talking to someone, I'm not sat there wiggling my head around like a friggin' idiot. Some people overuse it. Is what I'm saying.
Like you're sitting on a tumble dryer or something like that. Yeah.
God, you sat there, Michael J. Fox. Anyway, so back to the sound. I love Michael J. Fox. I'm sorry.
I do. Teen Wolf alone, before he does anything else, I'd love him just solely for that. And Frighteners.
Yeah. Oh.
So what else? Obviously, you mentioned sort of a couple in a sight and sound. What else did you find sort of audibly good about the movie?
I noticed there was, again, with the minimalist style, there's not an awful lot. There is backing track, but the use, and I'm going to keep using diegetic and non-diegetic, there's a lot of sound that should be there. So the sounds that you're hearing, there's a lot of ambient sound, which helps draw out the scene, and it makes it's weird because it's awkward but also kind of real. So you sat there thinking, well, why am I not hearing it back? And this is subconsciously, why am I not hearing backing music or anything like that? But also, if there was some, it would really jar the scene. It would change the tone entirely. And I quite appreciated that. I thought it made it grounded.
Do you think it's maybe this is me trying to put my opinion across? Do you think it makes you pay attention more because you're not distracted by the background noise? You're paying very much attention as to what's going on between these two.
That's a good point. Yeah, it keeps the focus to the conversation or the words that are being said. Yeah, definitely agree with that. When the soundtrack does kick in as well, it's also there's an awful lot of string being used, which is very horror friendly, obviously, as well. But it's not always used on the horror scenes. A lot of it's, again, to not draw out makes it sound really derogatory again, but it makes things like sound slower almost. So there's a lot of incidental scenes where the main character is just pottering around his house with strings playing. He can't hear it, obviously, so that would be non-diegetic sound. And I don't know, it's very nice. It's melodic, and it's not the sort of theme, like, again, when we always talk about Carpenter, where you're going to remember it and sat there humming, that vampire scene.
But yeah, I think it's not distracting in any way. I think it's sort of it kind of forces you to pay attention, and sort of, I think if it was entirely just dead silence, it would convey a different feeling whatsoever. But I think it's sort of it draws you in, and I think it's with the string and sort of almost sort of orchestral music, it gives it a timeless quality.
Yeah, definitely.
Whereas I think sometimes if you put in music from that era, it kind of dates it.
That's a good point. Do you think with the timeless quality then, do you personally think that could be a link to vampirism? Your time no longer means anything to you? Do you think that was intentional?
Yeah, exactly. So, because even though there's a little scene later on where there's a little bit of a dance party going on between the two leads, and sort of like moving the shoulders to it but not getting into it too much, and you're going, all right, is this what the music is nowadays? crazy kids and their guitar music,
hula hoops.
hula hoops and sort of Nordic sort of Scandi stuff going on in the background. You go, okay. Bit of heavy guitar, but aside from that, like there's little spots of that kind of music throughout the course of the movie, but the rest of it's very sort of, like you said, drawn out, but in a really, really good way.
Yeah.
A good use of strings, so it does give it that kind of timeless quality without trying to put in music that was too kind of current at that time, which would then date it quite badly. And imagine there's certain movies that you would watch, horror movies in particular, where they've got like a soundtrack done by a prevalent artist at that time, and then further down the line it's going to then date it. And I think that's really good about it, whether that was intentional or unintentional. I think as well, it's quite minimal. I don't think anything's wasted as far as the sound's concerned.
Yeah.
Like things that stick in my head is like the crunch of the soft powder underneath the character's feet. Other bits of sound as well, like whenever Ellie's eating or things like that. It's proper horrible sounding, but that's kind of true as to what it would probably sound like, rather than just somebody gets bitten on the neck and that is it.
Yeah.
Somebody maybe screams or sort of like something's muffled, you actually kind of hear almost like a lapping or and even like sort of like two things, like sort of Ellie's voice is not particularly typically feminine or masculine.
Yeah.
Because I think it's walking that tightrope between the two, and even like Ellie's breathing sounds different. It's almost like a panting dog or a cat.
Yeah.
Conveying for me anyway some sort of like they're a predator.
Yeah, good point actually. Yeah, I never thought of that.
And it sort of reinforces the whole idea that they're, for me, and he wrote in capitals on his little notepad, not human.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's really sort of, it's used to great effect, and it kind of like, it's uncomfortable. And I like that about it. I think you should be going, go on, bite that neck, come on, exsanguinate, which is a fantastic word, which means I think it's basically drain of blood.
Yeah.
Go on, exsanguinate that fella, lack or yuck or I don't know. And I'm not trying to be derogatory towards any kind of Swedish dialect. I'm not. It's just everything that they say sounds like it might be a flat pack cupboard or a bedside table or maybe a TV unit. He says having a TV unit behind him, made by that particular company.
It was funny you mentioned about the sound of her chewing as well. I actually read, again, I looked up a couple of little trivia bits, and one of the ways that they got the sound effect of the bite was very close to a microphone chewing on a sausage. Yeah.
He's vegetarian already, but yeah, that just reinforces it. The sounds remind me of, and this reinforces me being vegetarian, was a guy very intoxicated on the back of a hot, sweaty bus, making passionate oral love to a half roast chicken he bought from a local shop, and you just hear the sort of the lips smacking and he's getting a gristly bit at his finger, and he's possibly cracking open the bone and draining all the marrow from it.
I was hungry that day, man. God.
I was on the way home. It was a hot, sweaty day. I just finished work and I'm just going, oh my, yeah. You know what? Chicken and any other kind of animal-based project. You know what? It's just not for me. I could have been a serious meat eater at that point, and he would have just ruined it for me because he's just making horrible, audible love, passionate, driving, sensual love to this half roast chicken. It just horrible. But they made me think of that. Just talking about chewing on a sausage very close to the microphone, just all that kind of stuff going on.
It's an effective sound effect, but knowing that about it as well makes it kind of gross.
Nope. And then the other ones I was thinking is the movie, and then just kind of afterwards, it's very softly spoken.
Yeah.
There's very few raised voices. It's very just softly spoken.
Even the bullies.
I think
actually,
then again,
yeah.
Even then they don't shout at them.
Yeah.
There's very little interspersed parts where somebody raises the voice, which I think then makes it all the more striking whenever, say, Ellie shouts or says something. But I think it forces you to pay attention.
Yeah.
which is really, really clever. But yeah, like as far as like the sound and everything else, like there's like little bits and pieces, like it's very understated.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was very, very clever, because you could easily just try and put in some sort of really over the top soundtrack, something that's potentially going to distract from it. Don't get me wrong, like the likes of Jaws has that iconic song to it. Anything basically done by John Williams is iconic, and you kind of think about that possibly before you think about the movie. But this one, I don't think it has anything that's going to distract or detract you from watching the movie.
We did it when I was at university. I studied horror for a little bit, obviously, as well. It was one of my modules. And we did this this practice, as it were, where we had to study the opening soundtrack to 2 different horror films and figure out why it was. And I think the soundtrack to this will fall in the former, which the first one we watched was a Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The opening sound effect is just the sound effect itself of the camera, the old style camera, recharging its bulb, with the radio commentary of this horrific crime going on. And
do you know who that is that does the voiceover?
Oh, no.
It's John Larroquette. He's the villain from Richie Rich. Correct me if I'm wrong. Anybody who is listening to our podcast in the Backseat, drop us a message. It's John Larroquette.
Get in.
Is the villain from Richie Rich.
Yeah.
He's done a bunch of other things beforehand, but that's the one that sticks out for me. But John Larroquette is the one that does the voiceover work for it, and it's very... It's made me enjoy the movie that little bit more, in the wind full well that it's John Larroquette. But yeah, as you were saying, obviously the recharge, the
like it,
and then
the him talking a bit more, and then another one. It's really, again, with Let the Right One In, it's very minimalist, so it's keeping it grounded, and that falls in this category. Where on the opposite side, the other example we watched was The Omen, which is very grand, very operatic. There's a choir even singing in it. And then it fades to the hospital. So I think it's to do with the subject matter as well. So obviously The Omen being Damien, the coming of the spawn of Satan, they Let the Right One In, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a very oddly human experience. So it really takes it to you as a person. So if you all of a sudden had this weird grand operatic soundtrack and Let the Right One In, you'd be sat there thinking this film doesn't know what it's doing. So it blends really nicely, in my opinion, of course.
But yeah, that's it. Sort of, I really enjoyed the mixture between the two, and it doesn't try to do the thing that a lot of movies do. Generally, to a really good effect, where they do the juxtaposition of like the really soft, beautiful song opposite something horrific happening. I don't think it does that. No. I think it just sort of, it's in the background, it's the mainstay, and then something terrible happens and you're kind of drawn in at that particular point. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed that aspect of it. Bringing us to any of the other senses, what do you think it would kind of smell like to a certain extent?
Yeah, unfortunately, I say unfortunately because I keep combining them. The rest of them I would kind of combine. So we've got taste, touch, and smell. The reason being is they all kind of come together with the visuals and the sound being really minimalist and very cold. So that smell of waking up in the morning in the winter's day, it just hits the back of your throat, your senses. Like it whacks you like a stick to the ear. So that kind of really hits all three for me, to be perfectly honest. The cold air in the back of your throat as you wake up, the feel of it on your skin, the smell even sticks with you as well. Like a winter's day, especially in the UK, which the summer's a bit like winter a lot of the time. It's very familiar. But there's also those really kind of grungy scenes where, you've mentioned like the jar and things like that. You get this sort of really musky, I don't know, sort of sickly feeling as well.
I'd agree. I think there's certain things that sort of it harks back to kind of the 80s. I think it's 82 in which it's based. You can like kind of like the feel is like there's a lot of fleece being involved. Yeah, there's a lot of like fur-lined boots and sort of like going, you know what, I'm not a huge fan of a fleece, particularly a gilet. I personally hate them. I don't know why. Don't get me wrong. I just don't understand a gilet. To the point where I will, at various points of the day or during the week, I will say the word gilet in front of my my partner. just because I don't understand them. They're not for me. But yeah, it's a lot of like fleece and synthetic fibers. There's a lot of kind of like almost kind of feeling itchy to a certain extent because you're just dying to keep yourself warm. And it's sort of opposite that, you've got obviously the bite and cold, which I think just heightens everything, including injuries, including sort of illness, etc., that happens throughout the course of the movie. You can kind of smell the cheap booze because it's not in a particularly affluent area. You can smell the cigarettes. You can think loads of different bits and pieces. You can kind of get that tactile nature to it, and it conveys that really, really well.
And again, because of the cold air, because both my parents smoke, so I've experienced this firsthand. I don't personally, but when you're around somebody who does, in the winter, for some reason, it smells stronger. You can taste it more. The cold really does heighten your senses. It's weird, but go on. Sorry.
No, that was it. Sort of like getting into to feel about sort of how the character Oscar, I was going to say, as far as feel is concerned, that he seems quite numb to it. There's a bit where he's getting bullied, and he just kind of disappears off into his head, and then later on, whenever he gets that element of revenge, he's like alive. Yeah. He's suddenly starting to kind of feel again because he's being drawn out of a shell by this person, and it sort of brings it into it very nicely. Was that there's a section where Ellie tells him to stand up for himself, and you can clearly tell it's almost like a big sister vibe for like half a second, which is like, I've been around long enough. Bullies hit back and they'll leave you alone, or they'll step off for a bit. Sort of like, do this, and sort of it's the bit where he gets that element of revenge. He's like smiling. He's alive with feeling, because he's like, I've got one back on them. I'm no longer kind of divorced from my body. I'm now kind of awake and enjoying himself, and that's really, really good. And not to say that revenge is something anybody should seek out. It just is kind of justified at this point, because he's been subjected to it for seemingly no reason whatsoever, just because he's a little bit different. Because he's got a bit of a...
Not even that different, really, as well, when you watch it.
I know. He's just got a bit of a morbid curiosity, and I like that about him. And then it just so happens that he then goes into a particularly morbid sort of friendship, relationship, if you want to call it, with Ellie from next door. You can't get any bit morbid than a blood-sucking fiend from beyond the grave.
I've tried. But no, I think my last point on all the senses, to be honest, was because there's a bit more with touch, and it's more of you as a person. Like, you feel touched by the main character because, and I think this is done on purpose, in the movie, you are Oscar, you're put in his place. So we've all been in awkward positions where you think back and think, oh, I should have done this. I should have stood up for myself a bit more. I should have done something. And you get this sense, and this is where the feeling comes in, when he does fight back of, fucking go on. Hit him again.
Get in, yeah.
Go on. And then when the bigger bully comes in towards the end, you get this sinking feeling in, like, oh, oh no. But I actually like him as a character. I think he's great. He's just lovely. Go on, sorry.
He's a genuinely nice sort of, like, to a certain extent, a pure soul. Yeah. He's a genuinely nice sort of kid, etc. And then obviously these terrible things happen to him, and then he eventually kind of gets his own. He gets to enjoy what he's been missing out on to a certain extent, possibly due to his mother and father separating. I don't know about you, sort of not to try and bring it back to the story and ruin anything. Do you not feel a little bit uncomfortable whenever he goes to visit his dad, and then his creepy friend who wears slippers, like basically open-toe sandals in the snow with socks? Like, don't get me wrong, it's horrible seeing that in the summer, but seeing that in the winter, it just somehow made it more unnerving. But the guy turning up, I don't know if it was alluding to something more, but I felt on edge. I felt unnerved by it. And in the book, there's a lot more sexual nature to it.
Yeah. And
you learn a little bit more about the kind of Hacken, I think his name is like the caretaker. And I love their kind of closeness, but sort of she's very much in charge.
Yeah.
And he's kind of like the day keeper, just to make sure that particular person's safe. And my personal opinion was, I felt as though, and you said that some theories are that at least 300 years old, I thought that she was maybe a former sweetheart from her childhood, and he's aged and she's remained the same.
Could be even, yeah.
And there's a little scene in it later on where she's like, can you not go and see that boy tonight? and I think sort of he feels sort of like self-conscious or maybe sort of jealous to a certain extent, because this little boy's getting all the attention, possibly because that's the attention I got as a child, and that's what I took away from it. And that's why he's kind of like the tech caretaker. He's going out and committing these brutal acts so that she doesn't have to.
And is that a look of the main character in future, almost, as well?
Yeah, is that going to be something that's happened? Yeah. A little factoid as well, I looked into it. The Let the Right One In is a play on a Morrissey song, which is called, I think it's Let the Right One Slip In.
Yeah.
I think that's the title of a Morrissey song, but yeah, just really kind of beautifully done. And even like sort of getting back to sort of like Sight, there's a scene where Hacken, the kind of caretaker character, or like the father figure to a certain extent, is drinking milk, which then plays in with the other visual cue throughout the course of the movie, which is the white snow.
Yeah. Plus, it's a bit creepy. I don't know what it is about just watching somebody enjoying a
glass of milk.
In that scenario as well. Like, I don't know. There's a lot of uncomfortable bits, as you say, just little details. Him wearing sandals in that situation as well. You think it raises questions. Is all it is.
Yeah, and I think it's just incredibly well done, very artistically spot on, and it's very sort of not withdrawn. It's very minimalist, but it's done to great effect through the course of the movie. And you could make it all the bells and whistles and make it sort of really over the top, but I think that would detract from this little story that they're telling. And it's quite an intimate, innocent story with the odd bit of brutal violence and.
But that's also very intimate as well, though. Like the violence itself. I think that in itself has hit the nail completely on the head. The film itself is just so intimate. It resonates to probably anyone.
And not to try and be too artistic with it, but it made me think about like sort of there's a scene earlier on in the movie where they're talking about, but I just want to be alone. Like I want to be alone as well. So I kind of reminded me of all the strangest things that it kind of reminded me of. There was a TV show called One Tree Hill. Anybody who's listening in, I don't know as to why this is getting referenced in a horror movie podcast. There's a famous quote by Tennessee Williams, which is, "When so many are lonely as seem to be lonely, it would be inexcusably selfish to be lonely alone." And I think that's kind of that's quite poignant as far as the movie's concerned. That they both want to be lonely, but it would be selfish to be lonely alone.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, this will be very, very far between where you'll have me quoting from famous authors, unless it's maybe say Stephen King, and it's maybe some sort of one where he's taking the piss a little bit. But yeah, I think it's definitely worth people's time to watch the movie. I will have to watch the remake again at some point, but I think it sort of transplants the movie from Sweden to, I think it's like Wisconsin or like Dakota, which I think is where Fargo etc. is set. So it's got like that cold thing, but there was a lot of Scandinavian immigrants who moved to America, and they decided to stake their claim in an area which there was a similar climate and approach to life as what there would be in their home country. So I think how they've done it that way is very, very, very well done. But I'll have to rewatch that in order to kind of enjoy it, because the guy who's the director is gone on to direct so 2 of the Planet of the Apes movies, and also he's going to be doing the new Batman.
Oh really? Oh nice. Quite happy with
so
that.
Matt Reeves. So I'm really interested to see as to how that's going to play it, because visually that's very good, and that's almost
nice.
The lighting in it, etc. It's almost horror.
Yeah, and it'll lend itself really well to The Dark Knight. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that then. You're going to need a rating system for it.
For out of 5 smashed ears, severed arms. What else could you kind of do? Because there's nobody gets their eyes poked out.
No. Oddly placed flip-flops.
Bad CGI cats.
Aye, go on.
I'm gonna go 4.5 bad CGI cats out of 5.
Nice. Oh, that's a high rating indeed.
I think for me, because I'm the one that picked it, I knew it because I was going to enjoy it, rewatching it again, and then kind of not picking it apart, but just paying attention to the little intricacies that happens throughout the course of the movie.
Yeah. I'd probably give it 4 CGI cats.
Okay.
I think mostly just because I really like rewatching things, and again, to rewatch something like that this soon, I wouldn't want to watch this now, if you know what I mean. Like, I watched it the first time last year. Next year I'll watch it again, almost certainly. Which is why I didn't get the 5, because otherwise I always look for a mistake, because I always like to point out there's a continuity error. There wasn't one, so...
Well, apparently there was. I've done a little bit of digging on India Mike Delta Bravo.
Oh, nice.
Take from that whatever you wish. And that does have, there's a few continuity errors.
Oh, is there?
With the scar on his cheek and a few other bits and pieces, but nothing that's glaringly obvious. And apparently the scene in the swimming pool, you can see in the glass in the swimming pool the entire crew who's filming the scene.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, and three and a half.
It's not as bad as it's not as bad as it was a Passion of the Christ. That's got loads of continuity. There's loads of like goofs and stuff like that, where you can see a boom mic in the reflection of some martyr's blood. Yeah.
No, I'd still give it the 4 poorly CGI'd cats out of 5. I'm wondering if y'all want to chip in on this as well as an audience member, again at Podcast in the Backseat, but we might change the rating system to 10 maybe, because the way we're thinking about it is 0 is 50%. Well, why not do the whole 10, I suppose, because then everything will be 5 onwards, I guess. And the reason for that if you're new to the show, is because we are coming at this through love. We love the horror genre, and there's no point in picking films that we don't like. So that's why everything's going to be 5 onwards, probably. Yeah, go on, sorry.
Yeah, and I think that's I think that's a good idea, because we are doing it from the perspective of love, and we're not here to sit and pick apart movies, because
who are we?
It's so exactly.
Yeah,
we're not filmmakers. We're not in a position to be able to create something from nothing. So who are we to sit and say something incredibly damning or negative about it? So we're going to always try and concentrate on the positive, or even movies that are not perfect in any way, shape, or form. It's still somebody's had this made, and we've not.
Exactly.
And every movie can't be perfect. Exactly. Every movie can't be great, and we'll just sit and think about, how did this come about? How did they convince somebody to make this movie?
I don't want to criticise somebody, and for that filmmaker to turn around and say, well, you do better than...
Exactly. Who are we in a position in order to do it? And we're going to particularly pick films that we kind of enjoyed. And even if anybody who does listen does decide to pick a movie for us and we don't entirely love it, we will still try and concentrate on the positive as to what we've taken away from that, or maybe what it's made us think of, or what sort of the feeling that's conveyed for us, even if it's made us feel uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Which is actually a positive most of the time. This film itself, Let the Right One In, there's an awful lot, most of the film you're uncomfortable, and that's a good element. So feel free.
I think that's...
Go on, sorry.
I was going to say, I think that's the point of a movie, I think, is to make you feel something. And if you can, like you said, you spend 20 minutes after the movie not jumping into watching something else. You just sort of thought and tried to process what's happened throughout the course of that hour and 51 minutes, I believe it is. And I think that's good. That means that it's done. I hate to use the word job. He does air quotations. Job, because it's how it's made you feel. That they've done their duty.
Yeah.
In order to make you feel a particular way, and there's very few and far between where I'll sort of think, how did that make me feel?
Yeah.
Didn't make me feel particularly hungry.
No.
Didn't make me want to have a cat.
Didn't
make me want to open the blinds. And it didn't. There's a lot of stuff that just going, you know what? I don't fancy walking through the snow in the woods and somebody sitting there with a gas mask in his hand, and I'm just going, like how like not to sort of like, how stupid is that guy? Oh, you've got a gas mask with a gas bottle trapped there. What's that? A little bit? Can I have a look at it a little bit close?
I know. Just go the other way.
Yeah. What's that glimmering, shining, sharp object that you've got in your hand? Can I have a look at that? Oh, that looks like a knife. Oh, what are you going to do? Stab me? Dead.
Well, this is out of left field. What the hell? I'm bleeding.
There's this quite a famous story where some guy, just before he was stabbed, he was quoted as saying, "What are you going to do? Stab me?" And then he was subsequently stabbed.
Yeah, don't give them the idea. He might have just been taking his knife for a walk until you give him the idea to plunge it into your head.
I'm just going to give you a really close shave. Mate, you've got a bit of razor burn. Just let me get that for you. Oh, you've got a thread in your jacket there. You know what? I never thought about it. I could just stab.
I could just knacker you.
Oh, yeah. oh, Jesus! It's that red stuff. That's supposed to stay inside you. Apparently, that's not meant to be all over the floor. It's not meant to be all over your brand new T-shirt that you just got from.
Let me just eat this sausage really close to a microphone. It's horrible, isn't it? Oh, it's nasty.
But yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it. So, not to try and put you on the spot, I picked this one. Mm-hmm. We kind of, as a committee, picked the two prior. What do you want to do next?
Oh, I haven't thought about it. Yeah, actually, okay, if a knee-jerk reaction had to pick something, I don't want to jump straight into another Carpenter thing or anything of that element, because we've done a couple.
Agreed, yeah.
What I would love to do, because it's one of my all-time favourite films, and I just want to talk about it, would be the original Nightmare on Elm Street.
Agreed, that would be very, very good.
Yeah.
Because he is one of the big directors, and he's one of the trendsetters as well. Yeah. And sort of, I don't think anybody's managed to ruin such a thing as sleep.
No.
as this one particular director, and along with the enigmatic, the charismatic Robert Englund.
Yeah.
I think and we could potentially touch on in the remake to a certain extent as well. But yeah, I think it's a really, really good movie. And don't get me wrong, there's little bits and pieces of constraints at the time, that it was still a fun movie, and it's still anybody wearing that jumper or wearing that hat or that get-up immediately. They know what you're talking about. Everybody knows about Frederick Krueger.
I've done it myself when I used to work in a store. Well, at uni, somebody comes in a red and black even jumper, which isn't quite right, red and green. You'll nudge your friend and go, Freddy Krueger. They know who you're talking about. Freddy Krueger, of course, being Wes Craven's childhood bully, which is why the name Fred Krueger appears in most of his films, or Krug.
I think even the radio station in one of the movies is KRGR.
Yeah. But I'm sure the killer, even in Shocker, was called Krug. So
he was, I think he's like one of the deputy directors in the X-Files that plays the Shocker, by the way.
Ah, excellent. Yeah.
And little known fact, the guy who plays the protagonist is Peter Berg, who went on to direct such movies as Friday Night Lights. He did Kingdom with Jamie Foxx. He did Hancock with Will Smith.
Oh, nice.
He's done a lot of movies since then. He did the Battleship movie, but he has done a lot more kind of like he plays a bit part in Smoking Aces, which is a very fun big cast, silly idea, but executed really, really well. But Peter Berg is the protagonist in The Shocker, directed by Wes Craven, and then he went on to start making his own movies.
I won't ruin it yet as well. I actually am pen pals, as it were, with Robert Englund. So I'll tell you some fantastic stories and conversations that we've had.
I look forward to it.
I say pen pals, he did me a promo once, but I'll get into it in more detail. And hopefully he does listen to the show, as you will too.
Yes, and I think sort of it's not to sound like some sort of like therapy session, but I think that's all the time we have.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure speaking about another phenomenal film. Definitely recommended. Until next time, I've been Matthew Hutton.
And I've been Wayne Alexander.
Good night. Enjoy
your stomach pounder and coke.
As long as there's no pubes upon it.
Good night.
Podmany.